After the fall of Louis-Philippe's monarchy, on the same day that the bourgeois king was booted out of France into English exile, the 27th of February 1848, Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte arrived in France from his English exile. His father was the younger brother of the former emperor, Louis Bonaparte, King of Holland from 1806 to 1810. His mother was Hortense de Beauharnais, daughter of the Empress Josephine by her first husband, and so stepdaughter of the emperor. Charles Louis's uncle Joseph, his father Louis, and his own two elder brothers were dead, as was the Duke of Reichstadt, Napoleon's son. If anyone could claim the right to succeed to Napoleon's empire, it was Charles Louis. Two attempts to gain power by insurrection, in 1836 at Strasbourg and in 1840 at Boulogne, were abject failures. After the second of these, Charles Louis was arrested and imprisoned at the castle of Ham in the department of the Somme. There he studied and read and conducted scientific experiments and wrote his book on the extinction of pauperism. He made his escape in 1846, simply walking out of the castle disguised as a workman, an exploit often pictured and even caricatured. In elections for the Constituent Assembly of the Second Republic, at which candidates could stand in more than one department, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, as he was now known, was elected in 5 departments. In the elections for president on the 10th of December 1848, he was elected by 74.2% of the voters. In 1851, the rejection by the Assembly of a proposal to allow the President to compete for a second term of office was followed on the 2nd of December by a violent coup supported by the army. Opposition to the Bonapartists was swiftly overcome. On the 21st and 22nd of December 1851, a plebiscite was recorded as having approved the new regime by a majority of 7,145,000 to 600,000, and in January 1852 a new constitution allowed the President greater powers and a renewable term of office of 10 years. After another referendum on the 7th of November 1852, the Second Empire was proclaimed. On the 2nd of December 1852, the anniversary of the coronation of Napoleon I, the Prince-President Louis Napoleon Bonaparte became the Emperor Napoleon III. At the commencement of the Second Republic in 1848, the buildings of the Louvre and the Tuileries remained much as they were at the end of the reign of Napoleon I. The plan to unify the two palaces had scarcely progressed during the restored monarchy. Some projects did surface from time to time, but they were never translated into action. On the 24th of March 1848, the Provisional Government of the new Second Republic declared, "The Louvre Palace will be completed. It will take the name of People's Palace. The palace will be destined for the exhibition of paintings, for the exhibition of the products of industry, for the National Library. The people's workers are called in their entirety to the work of the completion of the Louvre." A decree of the 3rd of May proposed the extension of the Rue de Rivoli. On the 19th of May, the Minister of Public Works entrusted the task of studying and directing the completion of the Louvre to Louis Visconti and to Émile Trélat. Louis Tullius Joachim Visconti, 1791 to 1853, was the distinguished architect who had designed Napoleon's tomb when his body was interred in the Invalides under Louis-Philippe. Émile Trélat was the architect of the department of Seine and Marne, a pupil of Visconti's and, coincidentally, the son of the minister. The result of their work was presented in July. To disguise the lack of parallelism between the two palaces, they proposed to build a new North Gallery along the Rue de Rivoli to match the Grande Galerie on the south side, and to double these galleries along the eastern half of their length, creating rectangular courtyards within the widened wings. Meanwhile, Félix Duban was the Republic's choice for the renovation of the old Louvre. He was well known as the architect of the new building for the École des Beaux-Arts and for restoration of the chateaux of Blois, Gaillon and Dampierre, and of the Sainte-Chapelle. On the 3rd of May, Duban recruited 150 sculptors to work on the Louvre. Finally, 176 were chosen, and 160 set to work, while 16 were held in reserve. On the 12th of December 1848, the Constituent Assembly made a credit of 2 million francs available for works to the Louvre Palace, including making the Salon Carré, the Galerie d'Apollon, and the Salle des Sept Cheminées fit for use by the National Museum. A number of the sculptors that Duban had recruited were put to work on the riverside exterior of the eastern part of the Grande Galerie, ascribed to the Renaissance architect Louis Métezeau. The alternating curvilinear and triangular pediments from the Pavillon de Lesdiguières eastwards were renewed. All these sculptures date from 1851. Over the entrance of the Porte Jean Goujon, now Porte Barbet de Jouy, in the centre of this wing, between two triangular pediments, the plain curvilinear pediment was now replaced by a more elaborate broken pediment. The statues in the niches on the second floor, on either side of the window, were added in 1857 under the Second Empire, as they were all along this wing of the Grande Galerie. Under Dubon's direction, the Salon Carré, at the eastern end of the Grande Galerie, was given a glass roof, and the sculptor Pierre-Charles Simard, 1806 to 1857, provided the decor. At each end of this rectangular, not square, room, an atlas or telamon supports the cipher of the Republic. Between the Atlantes, circular and oval panels present cameo-like figures. These panels are set in gilded mouldings against blue mosaics. Beneath the roundels, sculpted divinities sit between cupids. Below, a frieze of panels in relief carries the names of artists. The Petite Galerie, on the first floor of which was the Galerie d'Apollon, was also in need of repair. It had remained unchanged since the alterations made by Levaux after the fire of 1661. He had placed fluted pilasters between the windows of the east façade and removed the dormer windows and the pediment. Under Dubon's supervision, the exterior was restored to the appearance it had in Jean Marot's engraving of the 1650s. The circular dormer windows were reintroduced, though they were now purely decorative sculptures and not real windows. A central pediment was also reintroduced, with a bas-relief by Pierre-Jules Cavelier, the main figure of which represented Fame with her trumpet. The decoration of the Galerie d'Apollon itself had been left unfinished when Louis XIV abandoned the Louvre for Versailles. It remained so in 1848, despite some additions in the 18th century. Dubon had the ceiling decoration taken down, cleaned and retouched. The roof was repaired, the sculptures and paintings put back, and the decor finally completed. To complete Lebrun's design, which was thematically focused on the sun god Apollo, the central panel of the ceiling now contained Eugène de la Croix's painting of Apollo slaying the serpent Python. At the northern end of the gallery, Joseph Guichard, a disciple of Ingres and Delacroix, painted the Triumph of Cybele, or Earth, facing which, at the southern end, was Lebrun's Triumph of Neptune and Amphitrite, dating from 1664 to 7. A third panel held a painting by Charles-Louis Muller, representing Aurora, paired with a painting of Night, or Diana, also by Lebrun and dating from 1664 to 7. The decoration of the walls of the Galerie d'Apollon, with their portraits of creators of the Louvre, woven at the Gobelin manufactory, dates from this period. Henry James visited the gallery in 1856, when he was a precocious 13-year-old. He wrote of the wondrous Galerie d'Apollon, drawn out for me as a long but insured initiation, and seeming to form, with its supreme coved ceiling and inordinately shining parquet, a prodigious tube or tunnel, through which I inhaled little by little, that is, again and again, a general sense of glory. The glory meant ever so many things at once, not only beauty and art and supreme design, but history and fame and power. The world, in fine, raised to the richest and noblest expression. The Salle des Sept Cheminées, adjacent to the other rooms that Dubon had restored, is in the Pavillon du Roi, at the southwest corner of the square of the old Louvre. The original view of the pavilion had been lost behind the façade that Perrault had conceived to widen the south wing of the old Louvre. The tall tiled roofs had been removed to match the height of the lower east colonnade wing. The King's chambers had filled the top 3 floors of this pavilion, with several rooms on each floor. 7 flues had served these rooms, hence the name of the Salle des Sept Cheminées, the Hall of the 7 Chimneys. The original panelling and ceilings of these rooms had been moved to the colonnade wing in 1817. This space now became a single room, with a glass roof and decoration by Francisque Duret. 14 winged victories holding palm branches are the main figures. Between them, hexagonal panels contain medallions with portraits of famous artists of the First Empire. At the corners of the room, the victories also support a medallion with initials of the French Republic, under which a pendentive, shaped rather like a pendulum, holds the figure of a bird or birds above a gilded panoply. All 4 corners have different birds and different panoplies. The reopening of these rooms on the 5th of June 1851 in the presence of the Prince President was reported in the Times on Saturday the 7th of June. A most interesting ceremony took place this day, the reopening of the Museum of the Louvre, which, in consequence of the repairs and improvements made in that sanctuary of the fine arts, has been closed to the public for so many months. As it was known that the President of the Republic would be present, numerous demands were made by the public for tickets of admission, which were most readily and courteously supplied by Count Nieuwerkerque, the tasteful and able director of the Beaux-Arts. 12 o'clock was the hour mentioned, but long before that time the Place du Carrousel was crowded with carriages and foot passengers on their way to the Louvre. With a punctuality which never fails, exactly as the clock of the Tuileries struck 12, the President was seen approaching from the Rue de Rivoli. The Prince entered the gallery by the gorgeous saloon known as the Salle d'Apollon. He was then presented with an address, which was read by Monsieur Léon Fauché. The great improvements effected since it was last open, the encouragement given by the Chief of the State to the arts, the care with which the splendid monuments of art by which they were surrounded were preserved, the decorations of the Grand Saloon and of the Salon des Sept Cheminées, the reconstruction of the beautiful Salle d'Apollon were all pointed out. The address was received with applause. The Prince conferred the decoration of the Legion of Honour on the architect of the Louvre, Monsieur Dubin, whose efforts have so much contributed to its restoration. Artists speak very favourably of the new arrangements of the Louvre. The light comes from above instead of from the sides, and the works of each of the masters are classed by themselves, so as to enable the student to form an idea of their change of style or their progress without having their attention taken off or their study interrupted by those of others. For Félix Dubin's work on these rooms, he was rewarded by the Prince President's presentation of the Legion of Honour. His work on the Cour Carrée, the interior courtyard of the old Louvre, was less appreciated. The central feature of the Cour Carrée in the last years of Louis-Philippe's reign had been an equestrian statue of the king's lost heir. Ferdinand, Duke of Orleans, had been a popular figure, tragically killed in a carriage accident. His statue, by Carlo Marocchetti, was removed under the Second Republic and re-erected at Versailles. It is now at Eu, beside the chateau, a former residence of the Orleans family. Marocchetti himself followed Louis-Philippe into exile in England, where he was much admired by Queen Victoria, and where he collaborated with Sir Edwin Landseer to produce the bronze lions in Trafalgar Square, cast in his foundry. Another of his British works is the statue of Richard Coeur de Lion outside the House of Lords in London. Dubon had a blank canvas to work on in the Cour Carrée, apart from the plinth of the statue which had remained there and which he asked to have removed in February 1851. One of the first ideas was to place a fountain in the centre of the courtyard. It so happened that the Fontaine des Innocents was being removed from the market where it stood. This monument was sculpted by Jean Goujon, who had decorated the Renaissance parts of the Cour Carrée. Later sculptors had imitated his style there. The project of moving the fountain to the Cour Carrée was mooted in November 1848. The scheme was eventually abandoned by Dubon as artistically inappropriate, as it would obscure views from one side of the courtyard to the other, while also not presenting sufficient contrast. The immense difficulty and cost of the operation also influenced the decision. Dubon, however, did not give up the idea of a central fountain. Around it, he wanted to create a kind of public garden with statues, marble balustrades, stone benches, iron railings, flower beds planted with shrubs and ivy, and gas lighting. At the same time, Dubon was aware of the pattern of footfall and wanted to provide multiple pathways for people to cross the square. The space would thus be divided into numerous, basically triangular compartments, like this one, with its semicircular stone bench. This plan dates from 1851. The drawings, elevation and plan for balustrades and basis for lamp standards date from 1850. This photograph from 1851 or 1852 shows the basic outlines. The final overall effect would probably have been crowded and overpowering. Cartoonists derided it. One showed the architect Philibert Delorme and the sculptor Jean Goujon frantically seeking their courtyard and not recognizing it. Another shows a contemporary architect, probably a caricature of Dubon, inspecting his new fortifications. The president was not impressed either, but in order to avoid Dubon resigning on the spot, he was persuaded to withhold judgment until the project was completed. He visited the Louvre in 1851 and again in February 1852, and still disliked the effect. He preferred an open space, possibly with a central monument. As he himself approached imperial power, his ideal was less and less a public garden, and more the courtyard of an imperial palace. Dubon modified his scheme accordingly, reducing the number of triangular compartments to 4. In April 1852, the president decided to allow this as an experiment on a quarter of the courtyard. Dubon's third version reduced the clutter even further. so that the street furniture was relegated to the corners of the courtyard, as in these prints. This remained the appearance of the courtyard for 130 years. In March 1852, Visconti was appointed architect of the Louvre, and Dubin stepped back from this work, though he continued to have a distinguished career, appointed Inspector General of Public Works in 1854, and working, for instance, on the restoration of the Chateau of Blois right up to his death in 1870. Under the Second Empire, there were two interruptions to the settled state of Dubin's cour carrée. By 1853, an equestrian statue was again the preferred central feature, and Francis I was chosen as a suitable occupant of the space. The statue was to be designed by Jean-Baptiste Auguste Clésinger. The weekly magazine The Builder of January 5, 1856, published an image of the cour carrée with the statue which was, it said, about to be erected. A plaster model, bronzed, had been placed in the cour carrée at the end of 1855, and it was removed on the 7th of January 1856. It was subsequently acquired by the Crystal Palace in London, and then in 1884 it was set at one end of Blackfriars Bridge. No permanent statue of Francis I was ever erected in the courtyard. In 1866-7 there were archaeological excavations in the cour carrée, followed by a decision to memorialize the outlines of the medieval castle in the paving of the courtyard. Otherwise, this part of the Louvre remained substantially unchanged until 1984. Another step was taken in the history of the museum on February 15th, 1852, when Louis Napoleon, not quite yet emperor, opened the Museum of Sovereigns in the old Louvre. It assembled from various collections treasures associated with France's royal dynasties, from Childéric to Napoleon I. They were placed in 5 rooms on the first floor of the colonnade wing, accessed from the south staircase. These rooms had previously contained Louis-Philippe's Spanish collection. The first 3 were already decorated with panelling and ceilings from royal sources. Firstly, the vestibule, with decorations from Anne of Austria's chamber at the Château de Vincennes. Secondly, the chambre à alcôve, including the alcove from Louis XIV's bedchamber, originally in the Pavillon du Roi, as well as the ceiling. Thirdly, the chambre de parade, with decoration from Henri II's ceremonial chamber, also formerly in the Pavillon du Roi. These 3 decors are still in these rooms. The 4th room was the Hall of Monarchy, or of the Bourbons, with decoration glorifying the monarchy. The 5th room, at the centre of the colonnade, was the Emperor's Hall, with decorations celebrating Napoleon I. The painter for both these rooms was Alexandre Dominique de Nuel. His work was removed after the collapse of the empire. Objects in this museum were very diverse, ranging from the throne of Dagobert to Napoleon's hat and handkerchief. Some of these are still in the Louvre, such as some treasures from the chapel of the Order of the Holy Ghost, dating from the time of Henri III. Marie de Médicis' mirror and her wall sconce set with cameos, which is said to have been a wedding present from the city of Venice. Anne of Austria's jewel box. Other objects were dispersed after the end of the empire, like Dagobert's throne, which returned to the Bibliothèque Nationale. This was not only a stage in the museum life of the chateau, but also a claim for the political legitimation of the Napoleonic dynasty as a prelude to the Second Empire.